Imagine finding an old, dirty 1-cent coin buried inside a dusty change jar, forgotten in a drawer, or sitting unnoticed in a pile of coins that looks like nothing more than ordinary pocket change. You might look at it and think, it's just a penny. But what if that ugly, beat-up coin has been out of circulation for decades and could be worth far more money than its 1-cent face value? Today, we're counting down 5 wheat pennies that can become extremely interesting to collectors, especially when rarity, minting details, condition, and demand all come together. And the most shocking part? Some of these coins can look like absolute trash after being dragged through mud for 60, 70, or even 80 years. So don't walk away from your dusty change piles just yet, because I'm showing you exactly what to look for. We're talking about the 1945, 1955, 1944, 1953, and 1948 wheat pennies. Coins that came from an era when the United States Mint was producing enormous numbers of cents for everyday Americans. Some disappeared into circulation. Some were saved by collectors, and others were simply forgotten. Over the years, many were scratched, stained, worn down, or even came out of places where you would never expect to find a valuable coin. But when the right date, mint mark, variety, error, or exceptional condition appears, the price can go vertical. Not every old penny is worth thousands, of course, but collectors and expert dealers know that the ugly, forgotten, beat-up coins can sometimes hide the biggest surprises. And we're starting with a wheat penny that has been sitting in American history for more than 8 decades, the 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny. This is a 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny. It looks old, worn, and maybe even worthless. But I need you to stop before you throw one into a jar of ordinary change. This little 1-cent coin has been through more than 80 years of American history. It may have been carried in pockets, dropped on sidewalks, buried under dirt, dragged through mud, or forgotten in dusty change piles for decades. And today, we're looking at exactly why collectors still pay attention to these old wheat pennies. Not every 1945 penny is a fortune, but the right combination of condition, mint mark, variety, and preservation can make a dramatic difference. A coin that looks like trash to one person can become an interesting discovery to another. And when you realize this penny has been out of circulation for generations, you start looking at that single cent very differently. The 1945 wheat penny was produced during the final year of World War II, when the United States was still operating under extraordinary wartime conditions. The U.S. Mint was producing enormous quantities of coins because America needed currency moving through an economy transformed by the war. But remember something important. Age alone does not make a coin rare. There were many 1945 cents made, so the date itself isn't enough to make an ordinary example worth thousands. What makes your coin worth investigating is what happened to that particular piece after it left the mint. Was it heavily circulated? Was it protected almost immediately? Does it have a desirable mint mark? Does it show an unusual variety or error? Is the surface original and untouched? These are the questions that can separate an ordinary old penny from a coin collectors may want to examine much more closely. Now look closely at the condition. If your 1945 wheat penny has been dragged through circulation for 60, 70, or 80 years, you might see flattened wheat stalks, worn lettering, scratches, dark discoloration, and smooth areas across Lincoln's portrait. It may honestly look like something you would throw away without thinking twice. But here is where coin collecting gets fascinating. Do not clean it just because it looks dirty. That old dirt, toning, or discoloration may be part of the coin's original surface history, and aggressive cleaning can leave permanent hairlines and damage that collectors dislike. An untouched coin can be far more interesting than a shiny penny that has been scrubbed until it loses its natural appearance. So if you discover one in a dusty box, an old collection, or a forgotten change pile, handle it carefully and inspect it before doing anything to it. And then comes the mint mark. This is one of the first things you should check. On a 1945 wheat penny, the mint mark can tell you where the coin was produced. Depending on the example, you may encounter a Philadelphia issue with no mint mark, a Denver issue mark with AD, or a San Francisco issue mark with an S. That tiny letter can become an important part of the coin's identity. But don't assume that simply seeing AD or S means you've discovered a jackpot. Collectors consider the entire coin, its rarity, grade, strike, surfaces, varieties, errors, and overall eye appeal. A heavily worn example and a beautifully preserved mint state example can have completely different values. That's why two pennies with exactly the same date can sit side by side, while one attracts almost no attention and the other gets a serious examination. Now let's talk about the condition that can make the price go vertical. Imagine opening an old collection and finding a 1945 wheat penny that was barely touched after leaving the mint. The original surfaces are still attractive. The details remain sharp. The wheat lines are clearly defined, and the coin has not been damaged by cleaning or harsh chemicals. Suddenly, we're no longer talking about the ordinary penny that circulated through millions of American transactions. We're talking about a coin that may deserve professional grading and a much closer look. Mint state condition changes the conversation. Collectors are often willing to pay significantly more for exceptional preservation, especially when a coin combines strong eye appeal with a high certified grade. This is why experienced collectors don't judge a coin only by its age. They judge what survived. And here's the part that keeps treasure hunters searching through their loose change. You don't need to find a perfect-looking coin to have an interesting discovery. Sometimes the excitement starts with a coin that looks terrible. Maybe it came out of an old lake area collection. Maybe it was recovered from an attic box. Maybe it was sitting underneath decades of dusty change. Maybe it looks like it has been dragged through mud for half a century. That doesn't automatically make it valuable, but it means you shouldn't dismiss it before checking the details. Look at the date. Check the mint mark. Examine the lettering and wheat ears. Look for unusual doubling, striking characteristics, damaged surfaces, or anything that appears different from a normal example. And if something looks genuinely unusual, don't immediately polish it. The ugliest coin in the pile can sometimes be the one that makes you stop. So, could 1945 wheat penny turn your loose change into serious cash? In the right circumstances, potentially. But don't believe anyone who tells you that every 1945 penny is automatically worth hundreds or thousands. Auction records and dealer prices can vary dramatically depending on grade, rarity, certification, and market demand. Some ordinary circulated examples are inexpensive, while exceptional pieces can attract much stronger collector interest. That's the real secret. The date gets you to look, but the details determine whether you keep looking. So if you find a 1945 wheat penny today, don't throw it back into the change jar. Put it aside, inspect it under good lighting, and compare it carefully with known examples. Because that tiny 1-cent coin survived an extraordinary period in American history, and after more than 80 years, you never know what may be hiding on its surface. And just when you think you've seen everything this old penny can offer, our next wheat penny brings us to one of the most famous and closely watched dates in the entire series, the 1955 wheat penny. This is a 1955 Lincoln Wheat Penny, and before you toss it into a jar with ordinary pennies, I need you to stop and look closely, because this is one of those dates that can make collectors immediately slow down and inspect every detail. At first glance, an old 1955 penny might look like nothing more than a dirty, worn-out 1-cent coin that's been dragged through circulation for 70 years. It may be scratched, dark, stained, and almost forgotten, but the 1955 date has a special place in Lincoln cent collecting because of a famous double-die variety associated with this year. And that means a seemingly ordinary penny can become extremely interesting when the lettering and date show the right characteristics. Not every 1955 wheat penny is rare, and not every damaged coin is valuable. But if you find the right variety, you could be looking at something collectors have been searching for generations. The story becomes even more fascinating when you remember when this coin entered American circulation. The United States was entering a new era, and these little copper cents were moving through stores, pockets, cash registers, dusty drawers, and countless American households. Millions of ordinary 1955 cents were produced, but particular minting error created one of the most famous varieties collectors know today, the 1955 double die obverse. This is not the same thing as a coin simply becoming damaged from circulation. True double die characteristics are created during the die-making process, before coins reach the public. That distinction is extremely important. A scratch, flattened letter, machine doubling, or random damage does not automatically create a valuable double die. Collectors are looking for specific, recognizable doubling in areas such as the date and lettering. So when someone says, I found a double 1955 penny, the next question should always be, is it a genuine variety? Now imagine finding one of these coins in a dusty change pile. Maybe it looks like trash. Maybe it has been sitting untouched inside an old box for decades. Maybe somebody inherited a jar of pennies and never bothered checking the dates. You pick one up, turn it under the light, and suddenly the 1955 begins to look different. The date appears dramatically doubled. Letters in Liberty or I in God We Trust may show the characteristic separation associated with a famous variety. That is the moment you stop and take a second look. Because the difference between ordinary wear and a genuine double-die variety can be enormous. And this is exactly why serious collectors examine coins under magnification instead of making decisions from a quick glance. One tiny detail can completely change the story of a 1-cent coin. But here's another warning. Don't clean it. If you discover a 1955 wheat penny that appears unusual, resist the temptation to polish it until it shines. A coin that has survived for 7 decades with original surfaces can be much more desirable than one that has been aggressively scrubbed. Even if the penny looks dirty, scratched, or ugly, leave it alone until you know what you have. Collectors understand that natural surfaces, original color, and preservation matter. A coin that looks like it has been dragged through mud for 60 or 70 years may still deserve examination. And if it happens to be an important variety, destroying its surfaces with cleaning could make the discovery much less impressive. Sometimes the smartest thing a treasure hunter can do is simply stop touching the coin. Then we reach the subject everyone wants to know about, value. Could a 1955 wheat penny really be worth hundreds or even thousands? A genuine 1955 double-die obverse can command substantial premiums, and high-quality examples have brought impressive prices in the collectible market. But here's where you need to be careful. You cannot simply search for the highest auction number and assume your penny is worth the same amount. Auction prices depend heavily on authentication, grade, preservation, appeal, and market demand. A certified, high-grade example can be dramatically more valuable than a heavily circulated or damaged coin. That's why expert dealers and professional graders don't just look at the date. They examine the variety, surfaces, strike, condition, and authenticity. The price can go vertical, but only when the coin has the characteristics collectors are actually paying for. So what exactly should you look for? Start with the date, then carefully examine the major lettering. On a genuine 1955 double-die obverse, the doubling is prominent and distinctive, particularly around the date and inscriptions. Don't confuse this with a blurry-looking coin caused by wear, damage, or poor photography. Use good lighting and, if possible, magnification. Compare the coin with reliable references, or have a reputable coin expert examine it. Check whether the doubling appears raised and integrated into the design, rather than looking like a random scratch or flattened edge. And pay attention to the coin's overall condition. A rare variety in heavily worn condition can still be fascinating, while a sharply preserved example can become much more desirable. This is where ordinary pocket change searching turns into real detective work. And now you understand why the 1955 wheat penny deserve your attention. This isn't a story about every old penny becoming a fortune. It's about knowing what you're holding before you dismiss it. Somewhere in an old collection, dusty drawer, inherited coin jar, or forgotten box, a 1955 cent could still be waiting for someone who knows what to look for. It might look worthless at first. It might be dirty. It might have spent decades out of circulation. But if the right double-die characteristics are present, that 1-cent coin suddenly becomes something entirely different. Not every 1955 penny is a jackpot, but the right one can make collectors stop in their tracks. So check your loose change, inspect those dusty piles, and never assume an old coin is worthless just because it looks beat up, because our next coin takes us back even further, to a 1944 wheat penny that has survived more than 8 decades of American history. This is a 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny. And if you found one buried inside an old collection, sitting in a dusty change pile or forgotten in a drawer for decades, don't dismiss it just because it looks dirty and worn. This little 1-cent coin is more than 80 years old, and it carries a story from one of the most important periods in American history. It may look like trash after being dragged through circulation for 70 or 80 years, but that doesn't mean you should throw it away. The first thing you need to understand is that not every 1944 wheat penny is rare or worth thousands. However, certain varieties, errors, mint marks, and exceptionally preserved examples can become much more desirable to collectors. And that's exactly why this coin deserves a closer inspection before it disappears back into the pile. The year 1944 was still a wartime year for the United States, and the mint was producing enormous quantities of coins to keep the economy moving. But something unusual happened with the composition of Lincoln cents during this period. After the famous steel cents of 1943, the mint returned to a copper-based composition for 1944 cents. This creates an important piece of history for collectors. When you hold a 1944 wheat penny, you're holding a coin connected to an era when the country was fighting a global war, and even the materials used to manufacture everyday money were affected by that conflict. Most 1944 cents were ordinary circulation coins, but the history surrounding this period is one reason collectors pay close attention to unusual examples. A tiny 1-cent coin can sometimes tell a much bigger story than its face value suggests. Now here's where the hunt gets exciting. When examining a 1944 wheat penny, don't just look at the date and immediately decide whether it's valuable. Look at the mint mark. You may encounter examples from Philadelphia, Denver, or San Francisco, and the mint mark can help identify where your coin was produced. But again, don't fall into the trap of thinking that a mint mark automatically means a fortune. Coin value is determined by several factors working together. A heavily circulated penny with scratches and damaged surfaces can be worth relatively little, while a sharply preserved example with strong original detail can command a much higher premium. This is why collectors inspect the entire coin. They look at the wheat stalks, Lincoln's portrait, lettering, color, surfaces, and strike. The small details matter, and sometimes those details are hiding under decades of dirt and wear. And then there is one fascinating possibility that makes certain 1944 cents especially interesting: the famous 1944 steel cent. A small number of 1944 cents were struck on leftover steel planchets from the previous year's production, creating an extremely rare error. This is a kind of discovery that can turn an ordinary-looking penny into a major numismatic event. But be extremely careful here. Many ordinary steel color coins are not genuine 1944 steel cents. Environmental damage, altered surfaces, plating, magnets, and other factors can create misleading appearances. If you believe you've discovered a genuine 1944 steel cent, don't clean it, scratch it, drill it, or perform destructive tests. The correct move is professional authentication. This is where expert dealers, experienced numismatists, and professional grading services can become incredibly important. Imagine finding a 1944 penny that looks like it came straight out of ground. It's dark, it's scratched, it's covered with years of grime. It looks like something that should have been forgotten forever. But then you inspect it and notice something strange about its composition or appearance. Suddenly, you're not looking at just another old penny. You're asking questions. Why does it look different? Where was it made? What metal is it actually made from? Does the date match the known rare error? Could it have been altered? This is a kind of mystery that keeps collectors searching through dusty change piles. And remember, dirty does not automatically mean rare, but dirty also doesn't automatically mean worthless. The important thing is what's underneath that dirt. Now let's talk about condition, because this is where the price can change dramatically. A 1944 wheat penny that's spent decades circulating through American commerce may show heavy where across Lincoln's hair, cheek, jaw, and the wheat stalks. That's normal. But imagine finding an example that was protected almost immediately after leaving the mint. Sharp details, original surfaces, strong strike, minimal marks, maybe even a beautiful mint state appearance. That's when collectors start paying much closer attention. Mint state condition can transform the conversation. And if an unusual variety or genuine error is combined with exceptional preservation, the potential market value can become far more significant. Auction results for rare Lincoln cent errors and varieties have demonstrated just how strongly collectors can compete when a genuinely scarce coin appears. But remember, an auction headline is not a guarantee of what your specific coin is worth. So if you have a 1944 wheat penny, here's your mission. Don't throw it away, don't polish it, and don't assume the date alone makes a fortune. First, inspect the date and mint mark. Then examine the color, surfaces, strike, and overall condition. If the coin appears unusually different, especially if you suspect a rare error, keep it safely stored and have it examined by someone qualified to authenticate it. Because after more than 80 years, this tiny coin has already survived an extraordinary journey. It may be an ordinary survivor from wartime America, or it could contain a characteristic that makes collectors take a second look. And that's the real thrill of coin hunting. The ugly, forgotten, beat-up coins are sometimes the ones that make you stop. Keep searching, because the next coin in our countdown comes from 1948, and it proves once again that an old penny doesn't have to look impressive to deserve your attention. The 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny may look like nothing more than an old, dirty 1-cent coin, but I need you to stop before you throw it back into your change pile. This penny has been sitting in American history for more than 7 decades. It may have been carried in pockets, dropped on streets, buried in dirt, or dragged through mud for 60 or 70 years. The surface might be dark, scratched, worn, and ugly enough to make you think, there's no way this is worth anything. But that's exactly why you should look closer. Not every 1953 wheat penny is rare, and most ordinary circulated examples are not worth thousands. But when you combine the right mint mark, variety, error, and condition, the story can change dramatically. And today I'm showing you exactly what to look for before you dismiss this forgotten 1-cent coin. The first thing you need to understand is where this penny came from. In 1953, the United States Mint was producing Lincoln Wheat cents for everyday American commerce. These coins were moving through stores, cash registers, pockets, banks, and households across the country. Some were spent hundreds of times, while others were pulled from circulation almost immediately by people who recognized their historical value. That means 2 1953 pennies can look completely different today. One might be heavily worn, scratched, and stained, while another may still have remarkably sharp details because it was protected for decades. And that's where collectors start paying attention. Age is only the beginning. The real question is what happened to that particular coin after it left the mint. Now turn the penny over and inspect the reverse. Those famous wheat ears are one of the easiest ways to recognize a Lincoln Wheat penny. On a heavily circulated example, the wheat lines can become weak and flattened. The lettering may be worn down, and the fields can be covered with scratches and discoloration. But if the details remain unusually sharp, don't ignore that. A well-preserved example may be much more desirable than a coin that has spent its entire life in circulation. And if you see something that looks unusual, possible doubling, an unusual strike, an unexpected mint mark, or a surface characteristic that doesn't look normal, set the coin aside. Don't clean it. Don't polish it. Don't scratch it. The original surface is part of the coin's history, and aggressive cleaning can permanently damage collectible value. Then comes a tiny detail that can change the entire conversation, the mint mark. A 1953 wheat penny can come from different U.S. mint facilities, and the small letter beneath the date can help identify its origin. But remember, a mint mark is not a magic button that turns a penny into a fortune. Collectors look at the complete picture. They consider rarity, mintage, variety, errors, grade, strike quality, color, surfaces, and demand. That's why expert dealers don't simply grab a coin, look at the date, and announce a price. They examine it carefully. A common circulated coin might be inexpensive, while a scarce variety or exceptional mint state example can attract significantly stronger interest. One tiny detail can change a conversation, but you have to find the right detail. Now imagine the condition of a penny that has been sitting forgotten for decades. Maybe it came from an old farmhouse collection. Maybe someone discovered it in a dusty jar in an attic. Maybe it was sitting underneath hundreds of ordinary coins that nobody had touched since the 1960s or 1970s. It looks terrible. The surface is dark. There are marks everywhere. It looks like it has been dragged through mud for most of its life. Your first instinct might be to throw it away. But stop. A dirty coin is not automatically a worthless coin. And a dirty coin is not automatically a valuable coin either. The important part is what the dirt is hiding. If the coin has a legitimate variety, unusual error, or exceptional underlying condition, Professional examination could reveal something you couldn't see with the naked eye. And now we reach the part every treasure hunter wants to hear about. Money. Could a 1953 wheat penny be worth more than 1 cent? Absolutely, depending on the specific coin. But don't believe exaggerated claims that every 1953 penny is worth hundreds or thousands. That's not how the market works. Values can vary dramatically according to grade, rarity, authentication, and demand. High-grade coins can bring much stronger prices than heavily circulated examples, and truly scarce varieties or errors can command serious premiums. This is why auction records can sometimes make people stare at their old change differently. A coin that once bought almost nothing can, under the right circumstances, become a collectible that attracts competitive bidding. The price goes vertical when rarity and quality meet demand, not simply because the coin is old. So here's what I want you to remember if you discover a 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny. Don't judge it by appearance alone. Don't throw it away because it looks like trash. Don't clean it because you think making it shiny will increase its value. Instead, check the date, inspect the mint mark, study the lettering, examine the wheat reverse, and look carefully for unusual characteristics. If something doesn't look right or looks unusually interesting, put aside and consider having it evaluated by a reputable coin professional, because this tiny 1-cent coin has survived more than 70 years, and somewhere out there, forgotten inside a dusty change pile, another 1953 wheat penny could be waiting for someone who knows what to look for. You might be holding 1 cent, but the story behind that 1 cent could be worth far more money. And now we're moving to the final wheat penny in our countdown, the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny. A coin that proves the hunt isn't over just because the coin looks old, ugly, and forgotten. This is a 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny. And if you find one sitting at the bottom of an old change jar, I want you to stop before you dismiss it. At first glance, it may look like nothing more than a dirty, beat-up 1-cent coin that has been dragged through mud for 60, 70, or even 80 years. The surface might be dark, scratched, stained, and completely worn down. But remember, this penny has survived more than 7 decades of American history. It has traveled through a time when these coins were ordinary spending money, passed from one American to another, then eventually disappeared into drawers, boxes, collections, and dusty change piles. Most 1948 wheat pennies are not rare fortunes, but certain examples can become much more interesting when condition, mint mark, varieties, errors, and collector demand come together. So before you throw that ugly old penny away, take a closer look. The 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny came just a few years after the United States had gone through the extraordinary coinage changes of World War II. By this point, the mint had returned to its traditional bronze composition for Lincoln cents after the famous wartime steel cents of 1943. That history makes the 1948 issue especially interesting to collectors who enjoy the story behind American coinage. But here's the important part. The government didn't secretly ban ordinary 1948 pennies from circulation, and there was no Federal Reserve announcement telling Americans to stop using them. They were regular U.S. cents made for everyday commerce. That's why you should be careful with dramatic claims that every old wheat penny was banned or removed from circulation. The real story is more fascinating. Many of these coins naturally disappeared from circulation because Americans saved older wheat cents, collectors pulled them aside, and newer Lincoln cents eventually replaced them in everyday use. Now take your 1948 penny and examine the mint mark. This tiny letter can tell you where the coin was produced, and it is one of the first details collectors check. But don't make the mistake of thinking that a mint mark automatically means you're holding a jackpot. The value of a coin comes from the complete package. What is the condition? How strong is the strike? Are the wheat lines still visible? Are the letters sharp? Is the surface original? Is there unusual doubling or another legitimate minting error? Is the coin in an unusually high mint state grade? These are the questions that can separate an ordinary circulated penny from a collectible that deserves serious attention. Two 1948 pennies can have exactly the same date and still have dramatically different values because their histories after leaving the mint were completely different. And now, let's talk about the ugly coin theory. Imagine finding a 1948 penny that looks like it's been sitting in a lake, buried in soil, or trapped underneath an old pile of change for decades. It may have dark spots, scratches, corrosion, and heavy wear, it looks like trash. But don't automatically clean it. That's one of the biggest mistakes a new collector can make. Scrubbing an old coin with household chemicals or polishing compounds can leave permanent damage. A coin that appears dirty may have original surfaces underneath, and an unusual coin should be examined before anything is done to it. Of course, environmental damage can reduce value, and a severely corroded coin may be worth little, but you won't know what you're dealing with until you inspect it properly. The ugliest coin in the pile can sometimes be the one that makes you stop, but you have to know the difference between genuine rarity and simple damage. Then comes the question everyone asks. Can 1948 wheat penny be worth serious money? The answer depends entirely on the specific coin. Ordinary circulated examples generally don't command enormous prices simply because they're old, but exceptional specimens, scarce varieties, major errors, and high-grade examples can attract stronger collector demand. Auction results for rare and high-grade Lincoln cents show that the market can pay impressive amounts when the right combination of rarity and condition appears. But never assume the highest auction price belongs to every coin with the same date. A heavily circulated penny and a professionally certified high-grade example are two completely different things. That's why experienced dealers examine the coin's grade, surfaces, authenticity, and variety before discussing serious money. The price can go vertical, but only when the coin actually has the characteristics collectors are fighting over. So what should you look for before putting a 1948 wheat penny back into your change? Start with the date. Then inspect the mint mark, lettering, wheat stalks, and Lincoln's portrait. Look for unusual doubling or other characteristics that appear to be part of the original strike rather than damage that happened later. Check the surfaces under good lighting. If the coin looks remarkably sharp and untouched despite its age, that's worth noting. If it looks terrible, don't automatically throw it away, but don't assume the dirt makes it valuable either. And if you believe you found something genuinely unusual, protect the coin and seek an opinion from a reputable numismatist or professional grading service. You are not just looking for an old penny. You're looking for the details that make one old penny different from millions of others. And that brings us to the end of this wheat penny countdown, but not the end of the hunt. We've looked at the 1945, 1955, 1944, 1953, and 1948 Lincoln Wheat Pennies. And there's one lesson you should remember every time you search through loose change. Never judge an old coin only by how it looks. The forgotten, dusty, beat-up coins are exactly where people often stop looking too soon. A coin may have spent decades out of circulation, sitting untouched inside an old collection, or it may have been dragged through everyday life until almost every detail disappeared. Most won't make you rich, and it's important not to believe unrealistic claims about every old penny being worth thousands. But the right variety, error, mint state specimen, or genuinely scarce coin can absolutely deserve a closer look. So check those dusty change piles, examine the dates, protect anything unusual, and remember, turning loose change into serious cash starts with knowing what you're holding.